I don't feel like a preacher this morning. I'm not a preacher. And I don't feel like a teacher. I used to tell my minister friends that we college professors had an advantage over them. They couldn't tell whether a sermon is going in one ear and out the other, but we could give an exam, and at the end of the week they'd have to write it all back to us on a piece of paper. But an athletic coach has an advantage over a professor that he isn't content with an answer on a piece of paper. When he tells the man how to run the hurdles, he doesn't make the team by putting down on a sheet of paper how the coach explained the hurdles race. They've got to go out and run the hurdles, and they've got to throw the shot, and the two most exact instruments of all modern times are used to record it. There's no guesswork. A stopwatch and a steel tape. If they can't meet those tests, they don't make the team. I'm standing here as a coach of athletes of the Spirit, and we're going out to run a race today, and you're not going to put it on pieces of paper or let it go in one ear and out the other. I'm going to give a talk this morning that may startle any newcomers, and if there's anyone just dropped in for the day, I want you to not judge this as the everyday sort of meetings we have. For I'm gathering together this morning all the examples of answered prayer where the Camp Farthest Out has had a very definite place in the world work and the world movement. I hope no one has delayed Frank Laubach from coming in. Now, is he here? I want him to be sure and hear this. So we'll pray that whoever is holding him out will bring him in, because he's going to give the talk tonight before the broadcast of prayer. I sometimes think we're too modest. There's a man who was a wonderful swimmer, was standing on the pier, and a little child fell in, and he saw Mr. Carnegie over there on the bank. He knew whoever would win, save that child's life, would win a Carnegie medal. And he was so polite. He was so polite that he said, "You jump in and do it, and you jump in and do it, and you jump in and do it, and you'll get the medal. I'm too modest. I don't want to get the medal." And let the little child drown. Folks, when the world is drowning and you know how to save it, it's time to speak up. And I'm going not to talk about promises of the future. I'm going to tell in the last 10 years of actual events in time, the last 15 years. On Starr Island in 1939, the world was just bristling for a great crash. A little gun a revolver had been fired Hitler's great crash, financial crash, had come into Germany due to our failure to underwrite the German mark. We let them just to suffer and go into terrific crash financially. The only way to save the nation was to end the depression there, was to put men in uniform and start them out conquering. So Hitler did it, and he saved Germany, and they all half-worshipped him. His army was lined up on the borders of Poland, and we were having a camp in Starr Island. And we sent a broadcast of love toward Hitler. We were not in the war. The really big war had not really started yet. And at 9 o'clock that night, Glenn Harding said, "I feel more spiritual power in this room than I've ever felt anywhere." Betty Lee, a returned missionary from Japan, said, "I can see Frank Laubach running full speed." Now, to pick up this theme, We you send out a prayer and it's answered. We sent out this broadcast of love toward Hitler in August 1939, and Glenn Harding had said, "I never felt such spiritual power in a room as I feel right now." Betty Lee, a returned missionary from Japan, said, "I know something's happening to Hitler this very minute and this very hour." I took out my watch, and it was 9 o'clock at night. The next morning, Betty Lee and I happened to hurried over to get our mail that had just come in on the boat from the mainland, and there was a Boston transcript with the big headlines. "Hitler changed his entire policy last night." I read down the main column. Those close to Hitler know the very hour and the very minute he made the change. It was 2 o'clock at night. It exactly the identical time when you take the daylight saving and all and change the time that Betty Lee had said, "I know something's happening to Hitler this very hour and this very minute." His armies were drawn up there, and they were under sealed orders to march into Poland at 4:30, and the great blitzkrieg turned out to be the greatest in history, just swept all over. But at 2 o'clock, he countermanded that order and told them not to march in until he had tried out a method of achieving peace. And he opened up telephone connections with Daladier and Chamberlain, asking for a year's truce, at the end of which time he would be willing to have Poland granted a plebiscite and vote how much land they would cede to Germany. He was insistent that they open a corridor to the sea, but beyond that, they could decide how much they would want to give. And to be sure it was fairly taken care of, he was willing to have Russia and Italy and England and France act as the umpires. Had Daladier and Chamberlain accepted that, we might have prevented that Second World War. We all think that Hitler started the war. He started it by these provocative methods. But there is an opportunity. And so the next day we spent the day in prayer that Daladier and Chamberlain would accept it. And then our camp came to an end, and half our group went to the mainland. The other half waited for the boats to come back, and a terrific storm came up. Terrific storm. The waves went so high, something like a hurricane, and they phoned back it was not safe for any more boats to come. All the cooks had gone, all the waitresses and all the materials, the food they'd taken, excepting some flour. A dory full of fishermen their dory filled with fish was thrown up on our island. So we lived on loaves and fishes for the next 2 days, and I'll never forget how Glenn Harding and I sat there and some others, and we watched those terrific waves between us and England and France. I said, elements are affected by the emotions. There's a tremendous seething going on there, as shall we go to war or not? And then Daladier and Chamberlain declared war. The winner of the Pulitzer Prize on his history, president of a college in Pennsylvania, little Friends College. I can't remember the name of it. Not Swarthmore, the other one. Haverford. I was invited to be his guest, and he said, "I have said the big mistake that Daladier and Chamberlain made was not to have accepted that request of Hitler. I'm here to say that 100 people on that island stopped the war, but we didn't have enough folks to carry it on. If Chamberlain had prayer groups all over this Britain, if he had Camps Farthest Out, as he will have now, if he had said to Hitler, you double-crossed us at Munich, and we don't dare trust you, so we're not going to take your little request. We're not going to give you a chance to double-cross us again. But if he had said this, the Bible says you cannot blaspheme the Holy Spirit. You can blaspheme the Son of Man. At Munich, you were dealing with sons of men, and you double-crossed us. But I have been in prayer all night. I have sent word now to all the prayer groups of Great Britain and the United States. I want to say you're dealing with the Holy Spirit now, and if you double-cross us, if we accept this truce, and you double-cross us, it's going to come like a boomerang back upon you, because you will have committed an eternal, unforgivable sin. I'm just really talking here like the prophet Amos would talk, because we have the facts, we know the way things have been going, and I can back it up with a dozen other things, merely backing up what Jesus has said and what the Scriptures say. That could have been prevented. I will admit this, if he had just weakly accepted it, I think Hitler would have double-crossed them. We're in a situation right now. Some people are cynics. Senator McCarthy said that the President Eisenhower just sold us down the river over there at Geneva. Not one of the senators agreed with him, but there are some saying that they just softened us up so they can do something more. If they're dealing with sons of men, they can. But because Mrs. Eisenhower, before they took that flight, sent word to Vivian Seaman to get the CFO prayer groups to be praying for him, because Edward Elson gave him a call to prayer that I had sent out. I gave the President that, and because he knew there's prayer underneath the whole thing, I want to say that Russia isn't going to do any double-crossing. If they do, there's going to be an eternal sin, for they'd be blaspheming the Holy Spirit that undergirded our steps in that. And it'll come back like a boomerang upon them. So much for that. Then, when we went into the war, and France, 1942, and Russia was calling for us to start a second front, why, we didn't have any men prepared. Take us to 1944, 2 years. But I wrote to Starr Daily and Glenn Harding and Frank Laubach that if they could take 7 months and we go around the nation, in getting the nation to pray and to send love toward Hitler, we would close the war much, much quicker. I cited as an example the wonderful analysis that the great psychiatrist Jung made of Hitler, that he deals on the realm of the subconscious, and therefore he simply outmatches Delardier and Chamberlain, who down on the level of the conscious realm. And I take this up in detail. I quote Jung and all that in my 2 of my books, Third Front and On the Wings of Prayer, and also in the Man's Reach. And then I pulled it out in an article for the Clear Horizons that came out early in the fall, saying that if we could get up on the 3rd level, up on the superconscious level, and begin to work in the realm of prayer and love, we'll cancel out all that magic of Hitler. That's what Jung said. It isn't brains that he's depending on. He has very inferior brains, very unstable emotions. But because he works on the subconscious, he's outwitting everyone all over the world. Everything he does, it's magic, Jung put it. He uses magic because he's up on that level. Well, if you get up above that, on the superconscious level, release love and prayer, if there's any evil forces being released on the subconscious, it'll just be canceled out.
I wrote all that with a definite promise, a statement. Frank Laubach, we waited for a month. We decided on us leaving on the September 1st. Frank Laubach's literacy commissions said the last minute said that he'd have to go, I think, in South America. So then we decided to go on November 1st. Now, this was all lies. Frank Laubach was an instrument in this. The very fact he delayed us was for some reason. And while he was on this literacy work, he was praying for us at the same time. We started this on November 1st, 1942, in a big Baptist church in Minneapolis, a packed church every night. We went to all the largest in America. We had big mass meetings at night. We had schools of prayer in the afternoon and morning. We'd stay for 3 days in each city. And we began on November 1st, 1942. When it was all over, I began to make the statement that all our battles before November 1st, 1942 were defeats. After that, all our battles were victories. I was making kind of a sweeping statement, but it was in the camp when I was up in Canada just a month ago, sitting in a room where I saw 5 great volumes of Churchill on the war. Right in the center volume was The Hinge of Faith. I picked it up, opened it up, and my eye fell right upon one passage, in which he said, after the Battle of Alamein, before the Battle of Alamein, which was around November 1st, 1942, we can honestly say that we didn't have a single victory before November 1st, 1942, and we didn't have a single defeat after November 1st, 1942, and we can say it just synchronized as an accident. But folks, when you bring God into these things, don't bring Glenn Harding and Glenn Clark and Starr Daily into this. I don't care who the instruments are. Any one of the three of you get up. And working with the destiny of God and in the plan of God, you'll find that letting God come in, the thing will come to pass, and you can give God the credit. I'm not giving God the Battle of Alamein way down in South Africa. Didn't have any bearing on the rest of the war, way off on the side. I give the credit to the fact that when we began to turn love loose and prayer loose, all the evil forces were just short-circuited and turned aside. Then Joseph Tucker came to see me. He came to the camp. He said, I'm the manager of this big company at $25,000 a year, and I've been putting the CFO methods in, and now the board of directors have come and they said I'm too soft in the handling of men. They're going to put me down to a subordinate job, a lesser job at $12,000. They're going to put my brother up to the head of it. Now, I don't object. I can live on $12,000. I'm not that certain about that. And I don't mind being humbled a little bit, but I don't like to be connected with a company that doesn't lead in these things. So I'm thinking of resigning and going down to Washington and offering myself as $1 a year man to help the government in this crisis. Well, Glenn Harding and I prayed with him and then said, well, go ahead. And he went. And they put him in charge of the agricultural work of the nation. One of the CFO girls, the first camp, was his daughter. As a result, she turned to religion and she became a missionary, and she had just written her father. We rode on bumpy roads 100 miles to get a sack of wheat. And we brought it home. It's half full. We've had to clean out the worms and things, but that wheat is going to take care of my little family all winter. I have to depend on that sack of wheat. That stirred him, and when he was put in charge of the agricultural products, he found that half our young men were going to war and that they didn't have men enough to handle wheat fields. The tractors that were cutting the wheat would run over the wheels would crush down about a fifth of it, and so he got an idea because he'd been connected with the company building those things. And he, by the right kind of a combination, a tractor, where the wheels followed, he got those constructed fast, but he found that everything was on ration, all materials, and they couldn't get the rubber. And the rubber to make, and someone said they've got a surplus amount of it up in Canada. So he flew up to Canada. He went to the government office, and they said, why, the man in charge of that is on a vacation. He's gone off for 3 weeks, and now this is a matter of life and death to get it done quick. Everything is ready, he just needed that rubber. And we can't do a thing until he gives the permission. Well, he was in Montreal, and he phoned to their capital cities, at Toronto, and that he was on a vacation. So he went into the biggest hotel in Montreal. They had 5 dining rooms. He said, I'm going to go to the very best one because I want to be alone. There won't be so many people there. And he went in, he said, and he sat down at a little table by himself and bowed his head in prayer. And he looked up, and there was the director of that phase of the agriculture, that phase of the cabinet of walking in with his wife. They sat down with another couple to take dinner. He went over, as soon as he'd finished, went over and introduced himself. He said, he told him the life and death situation that the United States was in to get this rubber, and they said, well, I'll sign the permit right here. They got it through. Joe Tucker had men from Minnesota, young farmers that knew how to run that. They had turned out about 100 of these machines. When the wheat was getting ripe in Texas, they had the army down there. They just harvested all that. They came north. When they reached Kansas, he reached a little town, and they said, and he went to the Board of Commerce, or the city manager and the mayor, whoever it was, and he said, why, there's a lady out here, a woman on the farm, and she came here weeping. She said, my crop is ripe now. It'll all be spoiled here in a few days, and my sons are into war, and I can't get anyone to harvest it, and I'm just going to lose it all. Without saying a word, in a few hours, a great harvesting machine was there, and a man went in and said, I have come to harvest your wheat. Oh, but how much will I have to pay? You won't have to pay anything. We're doing this for the government. Why, she just wept for joy, and it's hundreds of thousands of lives were saved from starvation by Joseph Tucker. And we talk about Joseph in the Bible, who saved Egypt from starvation. He was a second Joseph. Then he was put in charge of another big company, and then the family brought in their sons to take charge, and he was taken out, and he asked me to pray for him. It was a Methodist at a retreat in Chicago, a winter retreat, and he's never got over that. He said, I pray that he'd get the right kind of a job. He'd been out of everything to do for several weeks. And the next morning, I think he was waking at 5 in the morning, a telephone call from Wichita, Kansas, from the president of a company, asking him to come and take his place as president. He went there, and he built that company up. Joseph came to the camp at Kansas just a few months or so ago, June, and he said, I'm buying the company now. We're making one, and he's one of those, when he gets the thing going, he's going to be turning out much money into this kind of work that we can be doing. I followed him right through because there was an episode there that helped to bring marvelous things, and because of a missionary over there, a CFO that became a missionary, gathering that wheat, and it stirred him, the fact he was fired from a company and went down and got this great conception. Why, it was one of the most amazing things in history. You pick up the Time magazine. They sent a man down to examine all this area. Spent months to get the data, and they put up a long write-up. Then there's the great magazine called Fortune, read by the millionaires of America, and they put a long write-up about this
This was years ago, 10 years ago. Now, when I just came from the camp in Winnipesaukee, and Glenn Harding told how disturbed he was when in 1945, when Roosevelt came out with a statement that he was not going to accept anything but unconditional surrender. I read an article in the Atlantic Monthly in which about 2 words lost 1 million lives. Unconditional surrender. If Roosevelt hadn't said that, Germany would have surrendered and Japan would earlier. But when they knew that every one of their leaders were going to be executed, and the paper yesterday said that General MacArthur explains that only by his influence was that wonderful emperor, who's almost become a Christian of Japan, was going to be executed. We were just going to cut the heads off unconditionally. We were just going to everybody that fought us. That was a bad precedent, because another war, if we should lose, it would mean that President Eisenhower and everybody else in high office have their heads cut off. That was too bad, that unconditional surrender. So they refused to surrender, and we had to blow up all the cities of Germany and Japan, and now we're building them up again. Unconditional surrender. Well, Glenn Harding, at the Camps Farthest Out at Estes Park, said to me, it came to me that Jesus' teachings is that as you give, you shall receive. And if forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Well, why not apply that to this? I have this feeling, said Glenn, that if the camps furthest out, the campers could make unconditional surrender to God, Germany had already surrendered, that then Japan would make unconditional surrender to us. And I said, it just comes to me like a voice of God that after the 3 camps have done that, she's going to surrender. Well, we did it at Estes Park. Then we did it at the next camp. Then we came to the camp at Coronas. And there's a little Japanese girl, Toki, who came to the camps this summer. Mrs. Edith Johnson drove her from California to these camps. And she was in the camp at Winnipesaukee right there when Glenn was telling this. I asked Toki, she was a McAllister College girl then, to represent Japan and kneel down. I was having a private prayer with her and just make unconditional surrender, take all of nation in the heart and make unconditional surrender to the Lord, to God, not to the United States, but just to the God of love. And I said, somehow I feel that could, oh, how glad she was to do that. Then we, all of us at the camp that night at the broadcast, we gave unconditional surrender to God. In the meditation hour the next morning, Glenn Harding was leading it, and all of a sudden somebody came rushing out from the apartment and right into the chapel and shouted, "Japan has surrendered!" And everybody rose, and singing the Hallelujah chorus, we all marched out. We made an unconditional surrender to God. You must do that if you ever expect anyone to make unconditional surrender to me, to us. Folks, if I knew someone like Jesus who's made unconditional surrender to God, I'm willing to make unconditional surrender to Jesus. I'm not willing to make unconditional surrender to any mortal person unless he has made unconditional surrender to God. If we could put our whole nation utterly in the hands of a president who's made unconditional surrender to God, we're safe. The time's coming when we're going to examine our presidents to see whether that is so or not. Riding back from Hawaii, there was an inspector on the plane. Roland Brown and Marcia and I asked him what his method, what his duties were. Well, he said, I'm going to tell you something that other flying companies don't know about. But the examination of the mechanics is just under a lesser phase of my work. My big job is to examine the crew. If there's any discord in the crew, I bring that to an end, and if I can't, I take the discordant member out and change him to another flight crew that he can be in harmony with. We're the only company, flying company, that's never had an accident. Folks, when I said the power is in the Jesus promise, where two or three agree, and that word agree comes from the word symphony, harmony. That whenever we have had harmony in our council ring, we've always had it, excepting 3 times in the 300 camps we've had wonderful power. The 3 times we didn't have harmony, we went into deficits of from $700 to $1,200. I've mentioned a few instances of football teams where the tide was changed when they got the harmony. And that's why when we asked Roosevelt and Churchill and Stalin to agree on their war aims, and they said, no, we're too busy winning the war. We'll do that afterwards. The result, as I said, we never won the war. We defeated the enemy, but we've certainly got ourselves in a worse mess. And so there's laws of Jesus. I'm not talking about the CFO. I'm talking about the only thing that right we have to stand up and present these things is that all we're doing is illustrating the laws of Jesus, how they never failed. Tomorrow I'm going to take up my journey around the world and to show how, wherever the Jesus method was used, communism was kept out. They began to clean the White House. They began to revamp it. They found it was so full of rotten timbers that it cost them $5 million to revamp and recondition a White House that cost $300,000 in the first place to build. It cost them $5 million to mend a building that only cost $300,000 originally. Well, they found so much rottenness in it, and for those 2 years they were building that, I asked the Camps Farthest Out to ask Jesus of Nazareth, the carpenter of Nazareth, to revamp the White House spiritually. And if you don't know that it needs revamping, you go back into the inner history, beginning back there in the Grant's administration, where the graft was so thick you could cut it with a feather or with a knife. Where the Harding's was bad, yes. It's been rotten. There's always some rottenness in it. You talk about the mink coats of Truman's administration. There's been some even slipped into Eisenhower's. That is, Eisenhower wasn't to blame. Doesn't know about those things. It's around there. I think there's very little of it got into Eisenhower's. This is what we prayed. We prayed that would be so conditioned spiritually that when the other job is finished, that no new president would come in, be able to come in unless he'd put the responsibility on God's shoulders. And so when the job is done, I began to make this statement. I can almost see Angel Gabriel and Angel Michael standing with drawn swords at each side of the door of the White House, and a big sign, "Let no one enter here who's not going to say, put the government on his shoulders." Eisenhower is the first to come in under that new regime. Just before he's inaugurated, I was writing to Washington to sit in prayer with 12 men that had always met for 12 years on New Year's Day for prayer. When I arrived and went to the meeting of the 12 men, Stanley Jones gave the morning talk, and at the noon luncheon, Abram Brady asked me to give the talk while they were at the table. I was foot free to do it because I had no appetite. So I could talk to them. Edward Elson, sitting there, invited me to dinner that night. He said, "I'll come and get you at 5:30. He came and got me, took me to his home, have a wonderful repast spread there, fried chicken and everything else, and I couldn't even take a bite. He went to the phone and he phoned someone, and he came back. He said, "Uncle Glenn, I can see that you're sick." A doctor came in, took my temperature, 102. "You've got a virus." And they put me in their prophet's chamber right here in the pastor's home, the pastor of the National Presbyterian Church. I have often envied Gandhi, who had the stamina to have one day of silence every week. He came to England, and the king and the prime minister went down to meet him, but it happened to be his day of silence, and they had to wait. God didn't have to wait. I had come there like feeling broody, like a broody hen. Something was going to hatch, but I didn't know that I was going to be forced to get on the nest. I'd only had the flu once before. Edward Elson came in the next morning, said, I'm going to New York to see General Eisenhower, and I want you to pray, Uncle Glenn, that he'll join a church. He came back, said not only is he going to join the church, but he's going to be baptized. The next day he said, Uncle Glenn, General Eisenhower has come to Washington, and I'm going to see him this morning, and I wish you'd suggest a verse. That's a passage from the Bible. I'm to lead him. He wants me to lead the cabinet and him and his wife, while before the and put a blessing on him before the inauguration that morning. And pray, Uncle Glenn, that he'll have his cabinet meetings open with prayer. The Senate has a chaplain, the House of Congress has a chaplain, but the cabinet never opens their meetings with prayer. He came back and he said our prayer was answered, Uncle Glenn. He's going to open the cabinet meetings, always have them opened with prayer. Folks, I was there doing more value, and I'm telling you this, that sometimes the Lord lays you low, uses an opportunity. Take God's disappointments, turn them into his appointments. I phoned to Rufus Mosley to take my place at the retreat, CFO retreat, to share with Louise Eggleston, and I was more needed right there. And so we just kept praying. And when President Eisenhower opened before he gave his inaugural address, he began with a prayer. Later, he told a group of senators, and Drew Pearson announced it all over the United States. He told a group of senators, the reason I opened my inaugural address with prayer is because Dr. Elson gave such a wonderful prayer this morning in putting a blessing on us that I felt hereafter I must start everything with prayer. Now, this last year I was at Washington sitting down with Stanley Jones and Elton Trueblood and Walter, a wonderful congressman, Walter Judd, and Edward Elson, and Abram Brady, and so on. There's 7 of us. And Walter Judd said, my wife never calls me off the floor of Congress. But a few weeks ago she did. She said, I was sitting at the national meeting of the directors of the YWCA. I was sitting at the head table beside Mrs. Eisenhower, and she turned to me and said, no one would expect Dwight to have the faith in prayer that I have, because he's only belonged to the church a few years, and I belonged to it all my life. But it's almost unbelievable, the faith he has in prayer. You should just see what happens when he comes home at night or before he goes to bed, the way he reads the Bible and spiritual books, and he just spends his time in prayer. Why, and then Mrs. Judd said, I am so bubbling over, I just couldn't wait till you came home. I had to call you up. Now, all those things are happening. And I think when Eisenhower walked into that White House, he had that Jesus had done that cleansing of it, and I'm going to make a prophecy. No president from now on is ever going into that White House and going to put that whole job on his little shoulders. No president will be able to continue who doesn't say the government will be on his shoulders. If anyone comes in there and say, I'm going to run this thing in my own way and crush everyone else down, he's going to get a stomachache, and the vice president will have to do most of the work. I absolutely understand. But we have been praying. Don't think that everything goes so smoothly. We've been praying for years for a Department of Peace. I want you all to get this book, On the Wings of Prayer. At Koinonia, the group of us got there, and I'll never forget the remarkable speech and paper that Frank Laubach gave there. That we had, we all know that we've never lost a war. America's never lost a war, but she's never won a peace. The reason why is because we have a strong Department of War and no Department of Peace. And he made an appeal there for a Department of Peace. I've got that in his words in that in the Wings of Prayer, and it was backed up practically by the President in a similar address later. But we've been praying for a Department of Peace, and it hasn't been answered. I began to get a lot of letters a few years ago when 4 of our most spiritual ones gifted with the gifts of healing all went to heaven about the same time. Why is it that John Gaynor Banks, who preached healing, that he died. Rebecca Beard died. Albert Cliff, a specialist in the field of healing, died. Dear old Rufus Mosley died. Well, most of them around 70 anyway. I wonder some of them that had had handicaps before, that they had lived as long as they had. No, Rufus lived to be 86, but why did they all go about the same time? And I asked the Lord, and I opened the Bible to the book of Luke. Every one of these belongs to the order of St. Luke, which was organized by John Gaynor Banks and is now headed by his wonderful spiritual wife, Ethel Banks. I put my hand down on in the book of Luke on the 5th chapter. I think it's the 17th verse. And I came upon a remarkable passage. I had explaining why we hadn't been able to get a Department of Peace, because we couldn't penetrate 2 blocks that were crowding around, blocking us out. I had mentioned the fact that I addressed 24 ministers in one great city on prayer, and half of them said we don't believe in prayer. Most of they believe in it as a ritual, but not as a thing that's ever going to bring any results. Great many churches will not permit healing, spiritual healing. And so we call those not the hypocrites, but the Pharisees. Most of the ministers are all for this. They're thorough Christians and all the way. But these are honest men, but they just don't believe in going too far. But there's a great big lethargy, a block there. And then we had to get through it to these congressmen and senators. How can we reach them? They don't believe in prayer either. They believe you should, that is, so many of them, they don't believe in going all the way out. They believe that $60 billion spent for armament is the wise thing, and they don't give even $1 million for literacy that would bring folks into Christianity and win friends all. We could win all Africa. I was a guest at the